These are the new top builds in Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree after the new patch, so you can still make the DLC easier for yourself, even though things like the perfume bottles, for example, have been nerfed into the ground. For the start of the vid here, I'm going to show you one or two of those things that have been nerfed, just so you know what to avoid, and then we'll get into the top builds themselves. And also, a heads up, I will be showing different DLC bosses in this video, but I will not be showing the final boss. So that's just a heads up if you're being careful about that. I will be showing different DLC bosses. So let's begin. Like I said, a couple of things you need to avoid or just that have been changed in the patch, starting with perfume bottles, which used to be insane. You could cast them at the ground with rolling sparks and it would just do a huge amount of damage, and if you dropped it under a boss, the boss would die basically. But now they do next to nothing, and they don't explode the same way as before either, so I wouldn't even bother using these until they hopefully get buffed in the future. The second thing that's changed a lot is the Carrion Thrusting Shield. Now I actually have a full build guide for this if you want to check it out, but it has changed slightly in this patch. So what previously made it so strong was that when you were attacking while you were guarding, you take pretty much 0 stamina damage if your guard blocked an attack. And that meant that fighting bosses was crazy easy because you could just eat damage for nothing, for free, and it would only be your attacks that would make a meaningful difference to your stamina bar. But post-patch, that has now been changed. So you will now take stamina damage when you guard an attack. That said, it's nowhere near as badly nerfed as the perfume bottles, and it's still totally viable. Like if you build the build as I showed you in the build guide video, it's still gonna really slap bosses. And the footage I'm showing you on screen right now is post-patch as well. As you can see, it is using more stamina than it was before, but that just means that the pace of the fight is slowed down a little bit and you can still do a lot of damage. The good news is that some of the stuff that I covered in the build guide, like stacking stamina buffs from talismans or stacking them from the two-headed turtle and the green burst tear, for instance, those can all work in conjunction to increase your stamina recovery as well. So the nerf aspect of this patch is essentially reduced. Like you sort of take the sting out a little bit and it's still super viable. However, it is no longer the best shield build in the game. I've got a better one coming later in the video, so stay tuned for that. Our next build though to take a look at is the Immortal Chicken Wing. This one's from Rage Gaming. It's also just such a great name for a build, and it has been nerfed, but it is still really good. So the focus of the build is that you're basically a tank that will never die ever again. You rarely have to even dodge boss attacks. You can kind of forget about healing yourself, and really your only priority in life just becomes activating your Ash of War Prayerful Strike. So Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree becomes press a button and win the game, which is pretty fun. Like, that's a nice change, right? Now, you will need to take a little while to wind up the Ash, but while that's happening, you're going to have hyper armor, and that's going to last during the attack itself. And that's the source of your super tankiness. Alongside that, it also heals you for 30% of your life after landing a hit. And that's why I said that you just don't need to heal anymore. You essentially have automatic healing going on the entire time, so long as you're doing your one job in life, which is just to spam that button. Now, besides the Ash of War, the weapon we use for the build is obviously pretty important. It's the Blood Fiend's Arm, aka the Chicken Wing, but this is the part of the build that has just been nerfed. So the Blood Fiend's Arm used to get insane status effect scaling, like bleed damage, but that was tuned down. But it wasn't brought so far down that this is a perfume bottle situation. It's just in line with other weapons in the game now, but it still does have really high damage potential. The fact that it's in line with other weapons means that, in theory, you could run a different colossal weapon now if you desired for this build. It would still be really good and it wouldn't do too much less. So the Immortal Chicken Wing has kind of turned into the Immortal Variety Bucket. For the stats to spec into and all that stuff, you basically just want to get as much health as possible. So spec into that, and then all the talismans are just going to give you more health as well, or damage negation. And we're also going to add Morgoth's Great Rune for just even more HP on top of all that. So with our Immortal Variety Bucket checked off the list, we are now moving on to builds that haven't been nerfed and are just the best builds in the game after patch, hands down. Our next build is the Teleporting Twin Axe from Fextra Life, and this, in my opinion, is one of the most fun builds on the list. And when you successfully connect the axes back to back, it's even more satisfying. It's the epitome of fun in this game. The way it works is the Blink Bolt Ash of War teleports you forward in the direction you're facing, and that alone is pretty cool. But the best part of it really is that it gives you iframes similar to dodging when you use it. And that means that once you start getting used to boss movesets and when their heavy attacks are coming and stuff like that, you can just learn to dodge those completely. And that also goes for stuff that you might assume that you just wouldn't be able to dodge, like the charge, for instance, from Commander Gaius. Now, also, after using the Ash, it has a neat combo that it'll let you do with a heavy attack, and you basically unleash this spinning lightning move, which is really strong. And if you're fighting a boss that's weak to lightning damage, then you're going to nuke them so fast by doing that. Now, a couple of tips for this. I'd recommend using Golden Vow before a fight to help you really get the damage boost that this build needs. The main buffs we're using are buffing successive attacks with Rotten Winged Sword Talisman, and we'll also use Millicent's Prosthesis. And you may have noticed through the clips here, we do want some stamina recovery, so using the two-headed turtle helps out a lot there as well. I'd also recommend the Shard of Alexander Talisman, which boosts the attack power of skills. And speaking of Alexander, if you're a fan of that fine fellow, you might want an Alexander figure as well. And I've actually got a discount for these. This is official Elden Ring merch. I've got an affiliate discount code, IGON, that you can use in the U2 store. So whack one of these puppies into your basket, type in code IGON at checkout, and get yourself a little discount. Links in the description. All right, moving on. Our next build is maybe the most unique one on the list, and it's also a ton of fun. It's Miquella's chosen disciple from the Reddit user Dreadblade0001, and interestingly, this actually uses the Sword of Light and Sword of Darkness, which might surprise you because you might have completed the quest from the guide that I posted, link in the description and on screen now if you need it, and then you might have tried it in your game and been like, this is kind of underwhelming, like their Ash of Wars are meh, whatever, right? And I'd understand that. I'd totally sympathize with that take, but this build utilizes those weapons in a way that's pretty nifty. I think you're gonna like this. So we're gonna be using the multi-layered Ring of Light incantation that throws a spinning holy projectile at enemies. And this is fun any day of the week because it's just such a powerful spell. It's even better when you charge it up. No boss is safe against it. It's easy to use. The cast is actually pretty quick. It's got really long range. Like, there's just so many positives here. But you might be wondering, like, oh, hold on, what are we using those swords for? So let me explain that, okay? When you're going into a fight, right, before you go in, you first need to use your physic, and then in your offhand, use the Sword of Light's Ash. Then you need to cast Golden Vow to get extra damage and mitigation. Then go into the boss, pull out the Sword of Darkness in your main hand, and hit the boss with the Darkness Spinning Ash. Once you do that, it weakens their holy resistance, and it deals a decent chunk of damage as well. And then you can swap your offhand over to the Dry Leaf Seal for bonus damage, and your main hand has to be swapped to the Erdtree Seal to cast Multi-Layered Ring of Light. Now that sounds like a crazy order of operations, right? But try it a couple of times. You'll kind of get used to the muscle memory. It won't take long at all, I promise. It's only actually a couple of steps. It's just that the names of these things sound kind of wild when I'm yelling them at you over a YouTube video. But once you get that muscle memory down, I really think it's worth the setup. And as you can see on screen through these clips, it shreds as well. It's just a really, really great build, and it's so unique. But you may be wondering, hold on, how is it possible to have both of these at the same time? Like in my quest video that I showed you guys on my channel, I show you how to get the Sword of Light, and then you basically turn it into the Sword of Darkness. So how do you keep the Sword of Light in order to put this build together where you need both? The answer is you gotta either go into New Game Plus and keep the darkness from one and the light from the other, or you have to have a friend drop one of the swords for you. So it's fiddly. I accept that point, but it's still a really awesome build. And such a flex as well, something to show your friends. The next build is the Poison Flower Stomp from Paleoclassical Pants on Reddit. And while this does use the chicken wing, the Bloodfiend arm, which we mentioned earlier, got that sort of minor indirect nerf, it doesn't affect this build really, so you don't need to worry about the build efficacy being reduced by any means. The only thing you need to use here anyway is the Poison Flower Blooms Twice Ash of War with Poison Affinity on your weapon. And once you're in a fight, it's pretty simple. You're just gonna stomp the hell out of them. It will apply poison and Scarlet Rot, but those turn into bleed. And so it's essentially damaging with two different status effects all at once, with a huge bleed effect on top of all that as well. Now, a word of warning here is some of you might have some problems with this build. You might be doing what I've just explained, but that's not necessarily the most ideal way to fight. So For instance, I was actually using this wrong initially because I was just focused on the stomping. What I didn't realize is you can make it even more effective if you do a right trigger or R2 attack with the chicken wing. So you do a heavy attack with the wing, that will then apply poison to the enemy. And then once poisoned, if you attack the enemy with your Ash of War, that'll give you a huge damage boost. This isn't essential, like you're still going to do a lot of damage without doing that, but it just makes it even more effective. Now that strength comes at a price, I have to say, because you look a bit goofy while you're doing it, but honestly, I think it's worth it. Now, in terms of the stuff you need to make this build really shine, the Mushroom Crown increases attack power when something nearby is suffering from poison or rot, including yourself, which is why we're also using perfume bottles here. The Deadly Poison perfume bottle will poison yourself to proc that Mushroom Crown damage boost, and then we use the Speckled Hardtear to cure the poison ailment, but keep the damage boost. The Kindred of Rot's Exaltation Talisman buffs attack power by 20% for 20 seconds when poison or rot occurs in the vicinity. So that's another reason to poison yourself to get that extra damage bonus. And the reason our shoes look so goofy is because we're using the Divine Bird Warrior Greaves for 5% extra kicking attack damage. As you can tell, all we've done is kick over and over and over and over and over again with the Ash, so this also gives us a pretty nice boost. And we can synergize that with the Shattered Stone Talisman, which boosts kicking and stomping skills as well. Next up is the Great Katana with the Spinning Ash of War. I think this might be called the Undead Samurai. Got this from Poir Gaming. And this one has been inspired by none other than Commander Gaius himself. So you remember in that second phase of his fight when he just starts spinning to win, and then you take him out and you get his Ash of War, so you have your own spin to win action. That is the core of this build. And some people build this Ash with a Colossal Greatsword for huge damage, but there's actually a different way to build it, and that's with Bleed and the Great Katana. So that's what we're going to take a look at now. What happens when you do this is the Ash of War is set to Occult Scaling so that the weapon scales with Arcane, and then the goal is to bleed enemies for as much damage as possible. And to do that, we're spinning to win, right? So we're getting in the air, spinning attack again, and then resetting, and then doing the same thing again. And this does a great deal of damage when the entire attack connects, and it's especially useful against larger enemies that are guaranteed to take the entirety of a hit as well. And to really optimize things here, before we head into a boss fight, I'd recommend using 3 different spells to buff our damage and mitigation. The first is Golden Vow, like we've said before, increases attack and defense. The second is Flame Grant Me Strength, which buffs physical and fire affinity attack power. And lastly, it's Blessings Boon to regen health over time. You also must use Melania's Great Rune. That's going to mean that attacks dealt after taking damage recover HP. And there are a couple tiers that you should use. The Cerulean Hidden tier to eliminate FP consumption, as well as the Crimson Wall Bubble tier, which converts damage received into HP. We'll also be buffing successive attacks using our talismans. We'll wear the White Mask, which will boost our attack when there's bleed in the vicinity. And there may actually be some final optimization we can do to make this even stronger, because I feel like I haven't got the absolute max damage numbers out of this build that are possible here. So let me know what I'm missing in the comments down below. And if you're listening to this section of the build guide right now, check the comments just in case there's an extra talisman that I've missed that you're really going to want to make sure you've applied. Right, our next build is the one foretold in the prophecy at the start of this video where I mentioned that I had a new shield build for you guys. This one is called the Poke Shield. It's so easy to use. I actually kind of wonder if it takes some of the fun out of the game. All you gotta do is take your little thrusting weapon, which is any spear, great spear, or thrusting sword, hold your shield up, and then just start bonking. You'll block a bunch of attacks, you'll simultaneously deal a ton of damage, you'll resist a ton of damage coming your way because of the shield, and one of the sort of sweeteners for this build to really make it shine is the new DLC shield called the Verdigras Shield. It has the highest guard boost in the game. It's 90 boost. So you can tank like crazy, and your Ash of War actually doesn't really matter here. This is just a choose your own adventure game. You just got to keep poking. That's really the goal. However, while poking, there's obviously various bits of talismans and stuff like that that we want to make sure we've got equipped in order to do the most damage possible. So I would equip the Great Shield Talisman for a juicy 20% stamina damage reduction while blocking. And since stamina is very important, we also want the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman to increase stamina recovery as well. On top of that, before we start combat, we're going to want to use the sorcery Scholar's Shield. That's going to enhance damage negation for our shield to make it even more strong somehow. And in terms of the optimal weapon choice, I think that using bleed would be recommended here. You're going to be landing a lot of hits, so proccing that bleed should be pretty easy, and it's just going to add a ton of damage to the build overall. As an example here for my preference, I like to infuse the Sword Lance thrusting sword with bleed for super high bleed damage, really strong overall damage, and you don't even need to build it with arcane that way. You can just stack strength. The most important thing is you have enough stats to run all the items in this build, so make sure you're in the clear on those points, and all of the specking that you need to do for this I've put on screen here now as well. Right, for our next build, it's Impenetrable Thorns by Yui, and I gotta tip my hat. Yui is killing it with these builds, so great stuff there. So even though a lot of other things did get nerfed in this patch, for some reason, FromSoft is as big a Yui fan as I am, and they left the Thorn spell untouched for some reason. And that means that this thing still does insane damage, especially when you're close to enemies. So you're going to be doing nearly the same amount of damage as perfume bottles from before, but with a much easier setup. And you don't even need to be right next to bosses to get a lot of damage out of this thing, so this one's insane. It's great as well because the more thorns that hit an enemy, the more damage it does. And if you want, you can build this with bleed in mind. So if you hit all your thorns, the bleed will proc and do massive damage on top of everything else. Like, it's stupid. And that means that it wipes out everything in the game. It's fun, it's broken, it makes the game easy, and it inspires you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. Thanks for watching, folks. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.